My best friend of 5 years said if he texted the girl I'm seeing, she'd drop me instantly. There are some people you trust so completely that you never imagine they'll be the reason you start questioning your own worth. For me, that person was my best friend. We met during our first year of high school and somehow managed to stay close even after graduation. 5 years of inside jokes, road trips, late-night phone calls, helping each other through breakups, lending each other money when things got rough, you name it, we'd been through it together. He was the kind of friend my family welcomed into our home without knocking, and I was the same at his place. If someone had asked me to name the one person who would never betray me, his name would have left my mouth without hesitation. Looking back now, I realize loyalty means nothing when it's only one-sided. A few months ago, I met a girl through mutual friends at a birthday party. She wasn't loud or overly outgoing, but there was something about her that pulled me in. We spent the entire evening talking about everything from music and movies to our future goals, and before the party ended, we'd already exchanged numbers. Things moved naturally after that. There were no games, no mixed signals, no disappearing acts. We'd text throughout the day, meet up whenever we could, and slowly I started feeling something real. We weren't officially boyfriend and girlfriend yet, but everyone around us knew we were heading in that direction. For the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely excited about where my life was going. Naturally, I introduced her to my best friend. Why wouldn't I? He was like family to me. I wanted the two most important people in my life to get along. The first time they met, everything seemed normal. He was friendly, cracked a few jokes, and even told me afterward that she seemed like a good person. I remember feeling relieved because I've always believed your closest friends can sometimes notice red flags that you're too blind to see. Instead, he gave me his approval, and I took that as another sign that everything was falling into place. If only I'd known what was really going through his mind that day. Over the following weeks, I noticed something that made me slightly uncomfortable, but I convinced myself I was just overthinking it. Every time we all hung out together, he'd somehow become the center of attention. He'd interrupt our conversations, make jokes aimed directly at making her laugh, and constantly remind everyone how confident he was with women. She always remained respectful toward me, never crossing any boundaries, but I couldn't ignore the strange feeling growing in my stomach. It wasn't jealousy, at least that's what I kept telling myself. It was more like intuition quietly whispering that something wasn't right. One Friday evening, my best friend invited me over to his apartment to watch a football match. We'd done it 100 times before, so I didn't think much of it. We ordered food, argued over our teams like always, and laughed about old memories. Halfway through the game, the conversation shifted toward relationships. He started asking more questions than usual about the girl I was seeing. Was she serious about me? Had we made things official yet? Did she ever talk about other guys? At first I answered casually, assuming he was just making conversation. But then his tone changed completely. He leaned back on the couch with a smirk I'd never seen before, looked me dead in the eyes, and said something that made the room feel colder than it actually was. You know, he said with complete confidence, if I texted her tonight she'd probably drop you instantly. I laughed because I genuinely thought he was joking. Who says something like that to their best friend? But he didn't laugh back. Instead, he shrugged his shoulders like he just stated an obvious fact. I'm serious, he continued. Girls like confidence, and you know I've never struggled getting attention. I honestly think she'd choose me if I wanted her. For a few seconds, I couldn't even process what I just heard. Was this some weird attempt at humor? Was he trying to test my confidence? Or did he actually believe he could take someone I cared about simply because he felt like it? Trying to keep the mood light, I told him to stop talking nonsense. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. He pulled out his phone, unlocked it, and waved it in front of me. Give me your Instagram, he said. I'll prove it. My heart started racing, not because I thought she'd leave me, but because I couldn't believe the person sitting across from me was my best friend. Friends are supposed to protect your relationships, not compete with them. I stared at him, hoping he'd suddenly laugh and admit he was kidding. He never did. The confidence on his face wasn't fake, it was absolute. That's when something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger at first, it was disappointment. 5 years of friendship suddenly felt incredibly fragile. I started replaying every interaction he'd ever had with women I'd dated, every joke he'd made, every time he'd insisted he could steal anyone's girl. I had always dismissed those comments as harmless arrogance, but now they sounded completely different. Maybe this wasn't a joke at all. Maybe he'd been waiting for an opportunity like this all along. And as I sat there looking at someone I'd trusted for years, I realized I no longer knew whether my biggest problem was losing the girl I cared about, or discovering that my closest friend had secretly been rooting against me the entire time. I left his apartment that night with 1,000 thoughts racing through my head. The drive home felt unusually quiet because I kept replaying that conversation over and over again. The confidence in his voice didn't sound like someone making a stupid joke. It sounded like someone who genuinely believed he was better than me. The more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I became. 5 years of friendship should have meant something. We had celebrated birthdays together, helped each other through family problems, and promised we'd always have each other's backs. Yet somehow one sentence had made me question every memory we'd ever shared. I wanted to believe I was overreacting, but my gut refused to let it go. That uneasy feeling stayed with me long after I got home. and even when I tried distracting myself with a movie, his words kept echoing in my head. If I texted her tonight, she'd drop you instantly. The next morning, I met up with the girl I'd been seeing. She greeted me with the same warm smile she always had, completely unaware that my mind was somewhere else. I kept telling myself not to bring it up because I didn't want to create unnecessary drama, but she could tell something was bothering me. She asked if everything was okay, and after a long pause, I admitted that I'd had a weird conversation with my best friend. I didn't repeat his exact words because I didn't want her to think I was accusing her of anything. Instead, I simply said he'd made an arrogant comment that didn't sit right with me. She frowned, clearly confused, and asked why anyone would say something like that. Her reaction seemed genuine, which eased my mind a little, but it didn't erase the doubt surrounding my friend. For the next few days, I decided to keep my distance from him. I ignored a couple of his messages and blamed it on being busy with work. Surprisingly, he didn't seem bothered. In fact, he acted as though nothing had happened. He kept sending memes into our group chat, commenting on sports highlights and joking around like he always did. It almost made me wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe he really had been trying to be funny. Maybe I was letting one careless comment destroy a friendship that had lasted years. I nearly convinced myself to let it go, until something happened that changed everything. One evening while I was having dinner with my family, my phone buzzed several times. When I finally looked at it, I noticed 3 missed calls from the girl I was seeing. That immediately caught my attention because she rarely called more than once. Before I could call her back, another message popped up. It simply read, "Can you phone me when you're alone?" My stomach dropped. There was something about that message that felt different. I excused myself from the table, stepped outside, and called her immediately. She answered almost instantly. Her voice sounded calm, but I could hear there was something weighing on her mind. After a few moments of silence, she asked me a question I never expected to hear. "Is your best friend okay?" Confused, I asked what she meant. She hesitated before explaining that earlier that afternoon she'd received a follow request from someone she didn't recognize. At first she ignored it, but a few minutes later she realized it was actually my best friend's second Instagram account. Before she had accepted or declined anything, he'd already sent her a message saying, "Hey, I don't think we've ever really had a chance to talk properly." She hadn't replied. Instead, she immediately took screenshots before telling me about it. My heart started pounding as I stared at the screenshots she forwarded. There it was in black and white. The conversation hadn't gone far because she'd never responded, but the fact that he'd reached out at all was enough to make me feel sick. The timing couldn't have been a coincidence. Just days after confidently telling me he'd text her, he actually did it. Suddenly, every doubt I'd been trying to ignore disappeared. This wasn't about confidence. It wasn't about proving a point. This was someone intentionally crossing a line that no real friend should ever cross. What surprised me most wasn't his message, it was her response to the situation. Instead of entertaining the conversation or brushing it off, she apologized to me as if she'd done something wrong. I immediately told her she had nothing to apologize for. She hadn't encouraged him or hidden anything from me. In fact, she'd done exactly what honesty looks like in a healthy relationship. She could have simply blocked him and never mentioned it, but instead she chose transparency. That moment made me realize that the person I should have been worrying about all along wasn't her. It was the man I'd called my brother for the last 5 years. I didn't message him that night. I didn't call him either. I wanted to hear his explanation face to face. If there was some misunderstanding, he'd have the chance to explain it. But deep down, I already knew there wasn't one. The screenshots spoke louder than any excuse ever could. The trust we'd built over 5 years had cracked in a matter of seconds, and I had a feeling the conversation waiting for us wasn't going to end with a simple apology. It was going to decide whether our friendship survived or whether it had been built on a lie from the very beginning. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept thinking about the screenshots and the conversation we'd had only a few days earlier. The worst part wasn't that he'd sent her a message, it was that he'd planned it. He had looked me in the eyes, smiled, and practically promised me he could take her away from me if he wanted. At the time, I'd hoped it was just an immature joke. Now I realized he'd never been joking. He was testing the boundaries of our friendship, almost as if proving he had more power over my life than I did. By sunrise, I'd already made up my mind. I wasn't going to argue over text or exchange angry messages. After 5 years of friendship, he deserved one face-to-face conversation. Whether it ended with an apology or the end of our friendship, I wanted to hear it directly from him. I called him later that afternoon and asked if we could meet at the small coffee shop where we'd spent countless weekends talking about life. He sounded completely normal on the phone, almost cheerful, which only made everything feel stranger. When he arrived, he greeted me with a smile and reached out for a handshake, but I didn't move. His smile slowly disappeared as he realized something was wrong. I quietly placed my phone on the table and opened the screenshots she'd sent me. Without saying a word, I slid the phone across the table. The confidence that usually filled his face vanished almost instantly. He stared at the screen for several long seconds before leaning back in his chair and letting out a slow sigh. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked up and shrugged as though what he'd done wasn't a big deal. "I only sent one message," he said. "She didn't even reply." I couldn't believe that was his defense. It wasn't about whether she replied. It wasn't about whether anything happened between them. It was about respect. I reminded him of everything we'd been through together over the last 5 years and asked him one simple question. Why? He looked away before admitting something I never expected to hear. He said he'd always believed he was the more confident one, the more attractive one, and that he honestly wanted to see if he was right. According to him, it wasn't personal, it was curiosity. Hearing those words somehow hurt even more. To him, my relationship had become nothing more than an experiment to feed his own ego. I couldn't help but laugh, but it wasn't because anything was funny. It was the kind of laugh people make when disappointment outweighs anger. I asked him if he realized he'd thrown away 5 years of friendship just to satisfy his pride. He stayed silent for a long time before quietly saying he hadn't expected me to find out. That sentence hit harder than anything else he'd said. He wasn't sorry for what he'd done. He was sorry he'd been caught. There was a huge difference, and in that moment I finally accepted something I'd been avoiding since that night on his couch. The friend I thought I knew no longer existed, or maybe he never had. When I left the coffee shop, I didn't yell or make a scene. I simply stood up, wished him well, and walked away. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed several times. It was him sending message after message, apologizing, saying he'd made a stupid mistake, asking me not to throw away 5 years over one text. But I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd admitted. It wasn't one text, it was a decision. He chose to ignore loyalty. He chose to ignore respect. He chose to gamble with our friendship because he wanted to prove something to himself. Some choices can't be undone with an apology, no matter how sincere it sounds afterward. A few days later, I met up with the girl again and told her everything that had happened. She listened quietly before telling me she'd had a feeling something wasn't right about him from the very beginning. She admitted that he often seemed more interested in impressing people than genuinely getting to know them. But she hadn't wanted to say anything because she knew how much our friendship meant to me. We both agreed that honesty had probably saved us from a much bigger problem down the road. If she'd hidden those messages, I might have continued trusting someone who had already proven he didn't deserve it. Instead, the truth came out early enough for me to make the right decision. It's been several months since everything happened. We no longer speak. Sometimes I'll come across an old photo of us or remember a joke that only the two of us understood, and I'll feel a little sad. Losing a close friend hurts in a different way than losing a relationship. It feels like mourning someone who's still alive. But as painful as it was, I've realized that not everyone who spends years beside you is meant to stay in your life forever. Some people are only there until they reveal who they truly are. Loyalty isn't measured by how long someone has known you, it's measured by how they treat you when they have the chance to betray your trust. Looking back now, I don't regret losing the friendship. I regret ignoring the warning signs because I believed history guaranteed loyalty. It doesn't. Real friends celebrate your happiness instead of competing with it. They protect your relationships instead of testing them. They build you up instead of trying to prove they're better than you. In a strange way, his betrayal taught me one of the most valuable lessons I've ever learned. Sometimes the people closest to you reveal their true character the moment they think they can benefit at your expense. And when they do, the hardest but healthiest thing you can do is walk away with your self-respect intact. Don't forget to *subscribe, like, share, and comment for more crazy confessions I get from people.